right, what's up, Bass family? Jon D'Auria here, editor of Bass Magazine, and with me, as always, I have senior editor Chris Jisi and editor at large Elton Bradman. And
Yeah.
we're excited to present issue 11 as a good way to kick off the new year and 2023. And we're here to talk to you guys just kind of about the contents of it and what it was like putting this together. So, what's up, fellas?
What's up?
Yo, I can't believe we're doing an 11th issue, y'all. That's kind of crazy.
It feels good, coming from everything we've kind of been building on, and this one is very special to us, and it's packed full of great content. And what's kind of exciting and catching you guys about this issue?
Let's see, Chris, what do you think?
I'm really excited about the Lincoln Goines album because Lincoln, it's called The Art of the Bass Choir, and Lincoln definitely advances the concept of multiple basses played by multiple bass players. And it's the way he does it. He does it on the sonic front, he does it orchestrationally, and he does it harmonically. So, of course, with my long history with Lincoln, my first bass teacher and my first bass piece that I ever contributed to Guitar Player back in 1982,
Damn!
it was exciting to come full circle and write about Lincoln's longtime project.
Wow, super damn cool.
Yeah, and if you haven't yet, check out the album because it is fantastic.
Is it on Spotify already?
It is, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, great.
Yeah, it sure is. So check out the link inside the article. There is actually an embed of the album, and you can stream and download it everywhere. But yeah, really fantastic. Another thing that I'm personally very excited about is Elton did a few fantastic reviews, and in my opinion, one of the most innovative products in the bass world in a while are the Boss Waza Bass Air headphones, which you can see a breakdown of. Just click the link that is along with the issue. But also the exciting thing is that you paired it with the Vidami Blue YouTube Looper, which is something that our readers might be a little less familiar with. So kind of give us a little insight on how these two are amazing and how they kind of work together well.
Well, to be concise, I would say that the Waza headphones, the Waza Air headphones, are kind of the best practice tool I've seen in a long time. Imagine headphones that you can put on, Bluetooth linked to your bass, with a metronome and beats, and with bass effects all happening, all very possible, all very easy to set up. It's very super inspiring and makes it just easy to practice. The Vidami is the best for anyone who's ever learned anything from YouTube because it makes it super easy to play, pause, rewind, and loop any video on YouTube and other platforms too. It also can be a page turner. So if you use iRealB or something like that, it turns pages. So yeah, it's just a killer little pedal that I'm amazed that no one's ever done before. And if you use them together, you can be practicing along with a video on YouTube, stopping and starting, hearing it with the utmost clarity, and just kicking ass with no wires.
And you're kind of you're the expert on this because you've kind of had every iteration of practice amps and headphone, assistance kind of thing, and everyone nowadays learns from YouTube. It was kind of like the innovations were sheet music, and then the internet was like tabs, and now YouTube, it's like you have all these amazing people who take the time to be like, oh, you love this bass line, I'm going to hold your hand through it. So I mean, and one thing that kind of struck me when you first got the Waza Airs, you and I were talking about them because I have a set right here as well, is the clarity in which you can hear your bass is pretty unparalleled. I mean, it's kind of like you're hearing it legitimately for the first time in its purest form. Absolutely. The more you played with it, did that kind of confirm that for you?
Absolutely. The moment I got it, I really wanted to take out my basses and play them. I felt like I was hearing them in a new way. You know what I mean? And it's just it's very intimate. There's a way in which, when you plug into an amp in a room, you're really getting all those different sounds. But when you use something like the Waza Air, it's like, oh, this is the real voice of my bass. And you have all sorts of EQ options and settings and effect stuff that you can do. But that first moment where you plug in, you're like, oh, I'm like directly jacked in, I'm jacked into the bass. You know?
Exactly. Unfiltered, nothing else impeding on it.
Yeah.
And kind of speaking of basses and bass tone, your third review in this issue is the Dingwall Combustion BEAD, which Sheldon Dingwall, if you're watching this, if you could have heard all of our talks the last few months, you would have a smile ear to ear, because it's been nothing but singing praises. I mean, when you first plugged this bass in, you sent us a bunch of samples. You were so inspired. You recorded a lot. Tell us a little bit about that bass and what you love about it.
Well, one of the things I loved is that, I had this idea that the fanned frets were going to be tough, especially as you get up the fingerboard. You're like, well, I don't know about this. But sitting down with it for a few minutes and playing basic chord shapes and playing intervals, then it made me understand, like, oh, really, this is just a mental thing. It's fine. Like, it'll work out fine. But I think even more than that, there's something about the scale length, because the B string. First of all, I have to say, I strung this 4-string bass BEAD, which is a thing that is quite common and exciting, and Dingwall is promoting that right now. This tuning for a 4-string Dingwall, and the bass just has so much definition and string to string balance. It's just it's kind of amazing. It's kind of amazing that even when you tune down, your usual bass is EADG. I tuned down to BEAD, but you could even go a whole step lower, and the bass still retains like a real strength and character, which I really enjoyed. Yeah.
And that's something that we talked about a lot, is that, like, you think of Dingwall and you think of fan frets. Like, that's pretty much like the first and initial, thought that's in your head. And then you think a lot of metal cats, play Dingwall because of the tone that Elton's talking about. But one thing that you were saying is that this thing can be used for everything from R&B, gospel. I mean, we started to see Leland Sklar putting up YouTube videos saying, everyone check out this bass. Listen, this is what I use in the studio now. And so, a lot of our talks were like, people need to get their hands on these and kind of understand the tone that they produce.
Absolutely. It's such a strong, clear tone. I feel like there's so many people who would dig it if they gave it a chance. You know what I mean? I know that the visual it's kind of futuristic or maybe associated with heavy music, but I think that anyone who really prioritizes string to string, even tone, anyone in a studio, there's just something about it that I think more people need to know. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah. Absolutely. And speaking of kind of the Vidami Blue Looper and everything, and learning songs and kind of figuring out how to copy your favorite bass lines, like, one thing I'm very excited about in this issue is that we have a John Entwistle complete transcription, which is coming, it's coming off of a kind of unearthed solo album that the Ox's family is putting out. And so Chris kind of broke down this tremendous bass line, and you kind of spoke with his collaborator on it. Tell us a little bit about that, Chris.
Yeah, that caught my eye, that release, and the fellow who put it out, Steve Longo, John's longtime drummer from outside of his Who career, had this massive archive of John's stuff from a rock opera he was writing and film type music and songs he contributed to the Who that didn't get used, plus what they wrote together. And Steve was his best friend, really, in that whole time. And so I think it took a period of mourning, but enough people asked him, and he finally found the right label. And so he put this material out. So in addition to analysis of this transcription, with the help of our great transcriber, Steve Glasgow, it's really the story of Steve and John and how their career went. And it's a good insight into John's playing and how he felt about the bass and about music.
And the album is fantastic, and it spotlights John's writing and playing so well, and it's going to introduce a whole generation of players to him. And Elton, you saw them pull that stuff off live, didn't you?
I did. I interviewed Entwistle after a performance sometime around 2001. So with Steve on drums and of course Entwistle, and what I remember was of course he was loud, because that's Entwistle.
Yep.
And he was having so much fun, and they were an amazing rhythm section. And they were doing a tour called A Walk Down Abbey Road. So I got to see Entwistle playing Paul McCartney bass lines. So of course, afterwards, I asked him. I was like, "So, do you really study Paul's bass lines and try to, make your bass line sound?" And he was like, "No." He said, "No." He said, "I try not to." That was his exact quote. He was like,
Yep.
"I try not to." And I just thought, I love that spoke to the outlaw, the wild Entwistle that we know and love. You know what I mean? But even as wild as he was in a band situation, yes, he was the leader, but he was an amazing collaborator. And the way that rhythm section worked, I'm really glad I got to see it.
And I can report, talking to Steve, that he did send me one of those Beatle cover tracks, and that will be on volume 2, because this is just the first of a series. So this is volume 1, so we'll look for more of that. And good for Steve for keeping John's legend alive, because he's certainly one of the all-time great inventors and creators on bass guitar.
Absolutely. And speaking of the greats on bass, we also have John Goldsby, amazing player, and we're so lucky to have him as a columnist for us. And he breaks down, instead of doing more of a lesson, he takes an inside look at the playing and life of Charles Mingus at what would be his 100th birthday, which is a very cool piece, which you can click on right now in the issue links. And he kind of breaks down all of his albums and the era, the different eras of his playing, and you can listen to kind of his progression and his impact, which is Charles Mingus. He's one of the forefathers of the instrument, and one of the greats. So check that out. Additionally, columnist Patrick Pfeiffer has put out an amazing lesson kind of on his beginner bass about intervals and how you can identify them and use them. And that's a great column. So go check that out in the links. And
yes, that will be a series of columns. Patrick's going to tackle intervals all year, so it's a piece to that.
Yeah. So that'll be great. And then talking about other bass legends, we have Tony Levin hop on for our 10 questions, and he's one of the most innovative modern players of the instrument. And it's exciting to talk to him right now because he has so much going on. King Crimson just celebrated 50 years of the band with an amazing documentary, which we mentioned. And then Tony's busy. He's out on the road with Stickman right now, which he predominantly plays at Chapman stick. And then Peter Gabriel has an album coming out, and Tony's going to hit the road with him on a big tour. They actually just released the first single, which we'll include a link of, that has some amazing playing from Tony on there. And yeah, so that should be great. Man, what else? This is actually.
Well, let's talk about the people that you interviewed, John.
Yeah. It's I'm super excited about our cover, which is Laura Lee with Krungbin. And she's a fantastic player, and she kind of comes from a different upbringing on the instrument, which always makes it very easy and interesting to talk to her about it, because I think our readers can kind of resonate, the ones who aren't really sight readers or deep into theory. She's still very explorative and playful almost with writing her bass lines, because she only picked up the instrument like 10 years ago. She was a school teacher before that, and her buddy Mark Spears, who's the guitar player for Krungbin, was like, let's start a band, why don't you play bass? And she was like, let's do this. And now it's interesting because they're climbing to the top of the music world as an instrumental trio, and so to accomplish that is quite the feat. And I'm really excited for our readers to get insight into that, and even listen to some of the new music that she put out and that her band put out. So
I love in that story how there are two separate personalities. And I think that's it's a great lesson for any performer to be able to stay grounded, to separate the person who is at home, does dishes, lives a regular life, walks down the street without being recognized, and then the badass that we see on stage, who's full of life and who's almost like a mystical, very different personality. And I love how she has a very, very clear separation between stage and reality.
Absolutely, because Laura Lee is a very quiet, almost introvert person. And then, she gets on stage and she's like larger than life, and she does wardrobe changes, and she talks about how Prince and Bootsy Collins and James Brown inspired that. Why not? And Elton John, like, why not put on this grandiose show? But then when she takes the wig off and takes the makeup off and gets in some comfy sweats, like, she goes under the radar. She said nobody has recognized her without all of that. And that's huge for a performer. And so check that out. That's super interesting. Another one I'm very excited about is Robert DeLeo. Just put out his debut solo record after a huge lifetime, of playing in Stone Temple Pilots. And it's nice to get really, personal and in depth with him about that. Robert's a good friend, and he's kind of taken me along the road of when he decided to, create this album and the process, and would kind of send me mixes and early ideas of songs. And it's interesting for him, who wrote most of Stone Temple Pilots music, even on acoustic guitar, to go back to his guitar playing to write this material, which then opened it up to where he could be very selective of where and when bass occurs. So it's a very different side of him than we hear from, the Stone Temple Pilots music that we love. And so check that out on the link as well.
John, it feels like a lot of your other stories this issue deal with the sideman theme, which is really the thing that most of us deal with in our everyday bass playing, learning tunes, learning the gig. Can you talk about some of those other people you've interviewed that are doing that?
Absolutely. And there's kind of some reoccurring themes with that. And another feature we have is Emma Anzai, who is an amazing player, who has her own trio from Australia, Sick Puppies. And Evanescence recently had a lineup change where their guitarist Jen left the band, so their bass player moved to guitar. So they called up Emma, and she had a very limited amount of time to woodshed all their catalog to go on this big world tour with Evanescence and Korn. And it was really cool to hear how challenged she was by that, and kind of how she went about woodshedding, learning the material. With Sick Puppies, it's a lot of fast slap. And that was a cool thing that I think our readers will dig on is, she talks about how difficult it is coming from speedy and fast and technical to being pocket and groove, and she's like, everyone always says slower is harder. I just learned that, and so that's a very interesting thing. Additionally, kind of on the same boat is Tanya O'Callaghan was recently asked to join Whitesnake on their farewell tour. She had a very small amount of time to learn their whole catalog, and and she really wanted to honor Neil Murray and the original music, and so she gives a really good perspective on how to dive into that. And then even in the course of writing this and interviewing her, she got a call from Bruce Dickinson and that camp to go on the road to honor the music of Deep Purple, and so she had to start it all over and woodshed again. And so it's super interesting to see these artists and how they kind of take on the woodshedding, process. And then, kind of going back to the Robert theme, seeing the side men and women step out into the spotlight with solo. We have Jenny Lee Lindbergh of Warpaint, who I'm a huge fan of. And she put out her sophomore solo album right as Warpaint put out their first album in 7 years. So it's interesting to talk about how you approach your band setting versus your solo setting, which Robert touches on a lot, and how much more expressive you can be and how much more particular you are to your kind of craft as a bass player, when when those worlds collide and when you separate them and take them on independently. So that's a cool theme. Additionally, we have Nicole Rowe of Panic at the Disco answers our 10 questions, and which is a feature I always love because it kind of just is straight to the point, and the artists kind of just get to tell things like, who would you sub for if you could? What was the first concert you went to? What was the best concert? And what's your most embarrassing stage moment? Which is important because we all have them, and it's cool to hear the people at the top say, my plug came out, I was in the wrong tuning, or I fell down. It happens to all of us. Great to have some level playing field.
Hey, John, I noticed our spin, streams, and downloads review section features one of our favorites in the lead slot.
Yes, absolutely. And he's someone that we can't talk enough about. And in all of our talks, which are frequent with the three of us, a name that we constantly discuss is Adam Blackstone, who put out his debut solo album Legacy, and he kind of gave us word that he was putting it out, and we didn't know what to expect, and we were kind of blown away with the direction he went. It's Grammy nominated, by the way. Good luck, Adam, on that. Yeah, Chris, diving into it, what were your kind of, initial and even further thoughts on the record?
Just amazing. As I said, it's both a surprise and expected, because you don't expect that he's playing upright for the bulk of it with a big band behind him. Mm-hmm. But then when you see the lineup he has, it kind of makes sense, because he works with everybody, and he should summon them here to still somehow retain a personal message in the record of thanks and in the wake of the pandemic and all. But an amazing record. I mean, the orchestrations and the big bands and the guest vocalist.
Absolutely, and his impact is insane on the music world. He is actually just featured in an article yesterday that was like, why Adam Blackstone is your favorite artist first call for everything, and we talk about that. You turn on your TV, you're going to see him. And you can go back to our last issue, which was our bass brotherhood, and kind of read about he and the bond he had with his three brothers in arms of bass, and how they got their start in Jersey and Philly, and but it's check that out. You can go check that out in the link. Just a side note, which I thought was really interesting, is our brilliant copy editor Carl Coriat. We kind of had a discussion through editing this issue about, when do you think the talk of the lockdown will subside? Because all of these stories have, roots in that, because these albums coming out now, aside from Adams, who he wrote in a very short amount of time, they kind of had the seeds planted in 2020, 2021, etc. So, Carl was saying, like, when will these interviews kind of depart from that? And I guess, only time. What do you guys think about that?
I don't see that ever, because I found that in so many recent interviews, the amount of music created in the pandemic, I think it's going to rival something like the LA rock explosion of the 60s, where it's just like forever, because what a fertile creative period. I think we'll always be saying this great music was created in that pandemic void.
Yes.
Agreed. And even if we're not listening to music that was actually created then, I still think that it gave all of us time to start. We planted a lot of seeds. So even albums that won't be coming out for a minute, still the idea, the genesis happened during the pandemic. So I agree.
Absolutely. And we powwowed constantly through the lockdown, the Bass Magazine staff. And we would always say, imagine the explosion that's going to come out of this. Because everyone was at home in their living rooms. Yeah. A lot of the big artists, their instruments were like, in Europe or Atlanta, from getting pulled off tours. So we kept saying, when this gets back in order, holy cow, what's going to come of this is going to be explosive. And it really has been.
And how close to not happening. Like in Lincoln's case, he might never have made this record if it wasn't for the pandemic, because you're always going to have your Berkeley gig and your tours, and you want to do something, but then sitting alone in his Manhattan apartment and have nothing to do, he's like, I'll revisit this idea. And as you said, that happens across the board.
Exactly. And with Tanya O'Callahan, she said after COVID and everything, she thought she might be retired, because all of her gigs kind of subsided. Then she kept getting calls. And then it was cool to see, because of COVID, Jenny Lee Lindbergh and Warpaint and MNZI and Sick Puppies, they had albums recorded. And then with this kind of 2-3 years of gestation, sitting on them, they went back and reworked them. Because, everyone, if you're watching this, you're a musician, and that if you are recording an album, like, you don't really know when it's done, and you could infinitely work on it and make changes. And there has to be a point where you just cut it off. And that it's been interesting to see how people went back and reworked stuff. And then, the final feature of the issue, which I'm thrilled about, is with John Campbell of Lamb of God, which we have our amazing writer, Freddie Villano, on. And he kind of, he's close with John. So it's a great conversation. It's you can kind of tell their bond, and they kind of get deep into John's playing and what, you can expect from the bass side on this album. So that's this issue right now. So obviously, if you're watching this, you're inside the issue. So click on all the links above and below, check out the content. If you ever have any questions or just want to hit us, feel free to email Jon at bassmagazine.com. That's Jon at bassmagazine.com, which will be linked into this as well. But we really hope you dig in and enjoy the issue. Much, much more to come in 2023. Wish we could talk about all that more now, but you're just going to have to wait and check back. But we have a whole lot in store. And yeah, fellas, thanks for breaking down the issue.
Right on. Enjoy.
Enjoy. All right. Take care, bass family.